Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole stack of information, really dig into the research, and pull out the key insights just for you. Today, we're diving into something that, well, feels pretty fundamental to being human. Emotional intelligence. For so long, we've kind of held it up as this uniquely human thing, right? Something machines, no matter how smart, couldn't really get. But what if? What if those assumptions are being challenged? Right now, we're talking about large language models, LLMs, the AI brains behind tools like ChatGPT. Can these AIs actually understand emotional intelligence and maybe even create tests for it? That's what we're unpacking today, what the latest research shows about their, surprising skills here.
It really is a fascinating area, and the study we're digging into is from a Nature Portfolio journal, provides some truly eye-opening data. We'll be looking at how well these LLMs do on standard emotional intelligence tests.
The same ones humans take.
Exactly. And then, maybe even more striking, their ability to actually generate new tests. So yeah, get ready for maybe a few aha moments that might shift how you think about AI.
Okay, so let's tackle that first big question. When you give these standard emotional intelligence tests to LLMs, how do they actually stack up against people? I mean, before this, there was a lot of skepticism, right? Uncertainty about AI's emotional capacity.
Right. And what's really revealing here is the direct comparison they did. Researchers took 5 established ability-based emotional intelligence tests.
So not just personality quizzes.
No, definitely not. These measure key things like understanding emotions, managing your own emotions, managing other people's emotions. And they gave these tests to 6 big-name LLMs. ChatGPT-4, ChatGPT-o1, Gemini 1.5 Flash, Copilot 365, Claude 3.5 Haiku, and DeepSeek v3.
And the results, you said eye-opening. They were more than just surprising, weren't they?
They absolutely were. The LLMs, as a group, outperformed humans.
Yeah,
and
significantly. How much?
Well, on average, the LLMs scored about 81% accuracy.
81, okay.
Compare that to the human average reported in the original validation studies for those tests, which was around 56%.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It is. To put it in perspective, every single LLM they tested performed more than 1 standard deviation above the human average. Some, like ChatGPT-o1 and DeepSeek v3, were more than 2 standard deviations above. They were really excelling.
So they didn't just, scrape by. They really demonstrated a strong grasp.
They did. And it was consistent across all 5 different tests, with large effect sizes. It strongly suggests these LLMs can process information about emotions and come up with responses that align with, accurate knowledge about how emotions work and how to regulate them.
Okay, and you mentioned something about agreement between the LLMs.
Yeah, that was another key finding. They found substantial agreement among the 6 different LLMs. The intra-class correlation was 0.88 across all the test items.
0.88, so that means they were mostly giving the same answers.
Very much so. If one LLM tended to get an item right, the others usually did too. It points towards a shared sophisticated logic or maybe pattern recognition for emotional reasoning.
Interesting. And they also found a correlation with human scores.
That's right, a moderate correlation, about RLE equals 0.46. So items that were generally easier for humans also tended to be easier for the LLMs.
Which kind of hints that maybe both humans and AIs are picking up on similar cues in the questions. Like there's some shared underlying logic there.
It does suggest that, yeah. It makes you wonder about the deeper cognitive processes involved for both us and them.
Okay, so we've established LLMs can take these tests and do remarkably well. But here's where it gets, really mind-bending for me. Can an AI actually create a valid emotional intelligence test from scratch?
Right. This second part of the research really zeroes in on that. Specifically, ChatGPT-4's ability to generate totally new test items, new scenarios, new multiple choice answers for all 5 of those original tests.
So how do you know it wasn't just, cleverly rewording the old questions?
That was a critical concern. So they did a separate similarity rating study. They had human participants read the scenarios ChatGPT created and rate how similar they were to the original ones.
And what did they find?
Only about 12%, a really small fraction of the new scenarios, were rated as highly similar to any original item.
Only 12%.
Yeah, which is pretty strong evidence that ChatGPT wasn't just paraphrasing, it was genuinely generating novel scenarios. Even where people saw similarities, it was often just a similar setting, but the actual situation or the emotions involved were distinct.
Okay, that's genuinely impressive on the novelty front. But novel doesn't automatically mean good or valid, right? So they then gave gave these AI-created tests to people.
Exactly. They ran 5 validation studies with 467 human participants in total. People took both the original tests and the new ChatGPT-generated versions.
And how did the AI's tests hold up?
Remarkably well. The big finding was that the original and the ChatGPT-generated tests showed statistically equivalent difficulty.
Equivalent difficulty, so just as challenging for humans as the expert-made ones.
Precisely. That suggests the AI can create assessment tools that function at a similar level to those developed through traditional human-led methods.
What about things like clarity? Did the AI's scenarios feel realistic to people?
Yeah, they looked at that too. For clarity and realism, any differences were mostly very small, sometimes negligible.
So no major drop-off.
Not really. In fact, for some specific tests, like STEUB and the GECO tests, participants actually rated the ChatGPT versions as significantly more clear and realistic.
More clear. Interesting.
Yeah. Though one small point, the original tests were seen as having slightly more diverse types of scenarios when people were asked to categorize them. But overall, clarity and realism were very comparable.
Okay, what about the technical side? Like internal consistency, do the AI's questions all measure the same thing well? And how do they correlate with other stuff like general intelligence?
Good question. So internal consistency and correlations with things like a vocabulary test, which measures crystallized intelligence, weren't always perfectly equivalent in the pooled data.
Ah, okay, so some differences there.
Yes, but, and this is key, the effect sizes, the actual size of those differences, were consistently small.
Meaning statistically significant maybe, but not practically very meaningful.
Exactly. Negligible in most real-world applications. For instance, the link to vocabulary knowledge may be slightly weaker for the AI tests, but the difference wasn't substantial. And most importantly, the original tests and the ChatGPT-generated tests were strongly correlated with each other.
Suggesting they're measuring pretty much the same underlying thing, emotional intelligence.
That's the takeaway, yes. They seem to be tapping into similar constructs.
So, if these AI-generated tests are that robust, what does this actually mean for using LLMs in the real world? Especially in areas where emotions are really important.
Well, this really opens up the conversation about implications, doesn't it? First off, these findings really bolster the case for ChatGPT-4 having potential for, let's call it, emotionally intelligent interactions.
Even if it's not feeling anything itself.
Precisely. It's not about affective empathy, the feeling with someone. It's about cognitive empathy, the ability to reason accurately about emotions, understand them, predict responses, figure out regulation strategies.
And that cognitive empathy is enough for many applications.
Absolutely. Think about healthcare, hospitality, customer service. You don't necessarily need the AI to feel sad with a patient, but you need it to understand sadness, recognize its signs, and suggest appropriate support or action. That capability is crucial.
So an AI mental health chatbot, for example, could be effective by offering good advice and showing understanding, even without genuine feelings.
Exactly that. It can demonstrate empathic behaviors like active listening, reflecting feelings, offering sound suggestions based on its vast knowledge, and that can be incredibly valuable. It's about simulating understanding effectively.
Are there advantages LLMs might have over humans in these kinds of interactions, beyond just being available 24/7?
There are potentially 2 big ones. First, their knowledge base. They process emotional scenarios drawing on enormous data sets, which might lead to fewer errors or biases compared to a human relying on their individual, maybe limited experiences. ChatGPT-4's strong performance suggests its reasoning about emotions is generally quite reliable.
Okay, so broader knowledge base potentially means more accurate responses sometimes.
Potentially, yes. And second is consistency. Humans. Well, we have good days and bad days. Our mood, fatigue, personal biases can affect how we respond emotionally or how well we manage a situation.
Right. An AI doesn't get tired or annoyed.
Exactly. An AI system can, in theory, deliver its maximal performance in understanding and managing emotions every single time, consistently.
That consistency is a powerful argument, especially in sensitive fields like mental health support or crisis lines. Imagine support that's always patient, always applying best practices.
It definitely raises possibilities.
And this ability to create tests. Huge implications for psychology and how we develop assessments too, right?
Oh, absolutely. This research strongly suggests LLMs like ChatGPT could be powerful assistants in psychometric development.
Speeding things up.
Massively. Creating good standardized tests traditionally takes ages, writing items, collecting data, validating. ChatGPT-4 generated whole tests with pretty decent psychometric properties from just a few prompts.
But it doesn't replace the human experts entirely, I assume.
No, definitely not. It's a tool, a very powerful one for generating an initial pool of items, maybe suggesting structures. But you absolutely still need human oversight, pilot testing with real people, and rigorous validation studies to refine items, toss out bad ones, and ensure the final test truly measures what it's supposed to measure accurately.
Okay, makes sense. Now, let's do the necessary reality check. Every study has limits. What are the boundaries we need to be aware of with this research?
Good point. A key one is the type of test used. These were standardized tests, multiple choice, clear scenarios.
Right, neat and tidy.
Exactly. Real-world emotional situations are messy. They're ambiguous. You get incomplete information. You have to read between the lines, pick up on nonverbal cues.
Things an LLM reading text might miss.
Potentially, yes.
Sure.
We know LLM performance can sometimes wobble if you change the prompt slightly. So their ability to handle less structured, more spontaneous emotional interactions might still be limited. We need more research on how they handle context and history in longer conversations, not just single prompts.
In culture, emotions aren't universal in how they're expressed or managed. This was done in a Western context.
That's a critical limitation.
What?
Yes, the research participants and likely the bulk of the LLM training data are Western-centric.
So, what's considered correct emotionally might differ hugely elsewhere?
Absolutely. Emotional display rules, preferred regulation strategies, they vary a lot across cultures. An answer deemed correct in the US or Europe might be inappropriate in East Asia or Latin America. This really limits the current utility of these models globally without significant adaptation and culturally aware training. It's a huge area for future work.
And then there's the classic AI challenge, the black box. We see the input, we see the impressive output, but the how is still murky.
That's right. The exact processes inside the LLM that lead to a correct answer on an emotional intelligence test or generate a plausible new scenario, they remain largely opaque.
Which makes it hard to predict future performance.
It does. If the model architecture changes or the training data shifts, performance could change in unexpected ways. We lack that deep understanding of why it works. Although the trend so far has been that newer models tend to get better at these cognitive tasks, so there's reason for cautious optimism about improvement.
Okay, so acknowledging those limitations, the structured tasks, the cultural bias, the black box, what's the final big takeaway for our listener?
I think the overall picture is genuinely encouraging, maybe even a bit revolutionary for how we think about AI capabilities. These LLMs show significant, measurable potential in both understanding emotional intelligence concepts, enough to ace tests, and creating tools to measure it.
So they can be valuable tools.
Very valuable, I think. Tools to support better socio-emotional outcomes. Imagine using an LLM to get a different perspective on an emotional conflict you're having, or to explore different ways to handle a tricky interpersonal situation. They could help us make more informed, maybe more emotionally intelligent decisions ourselves.
It really pushes them closer to that idea of artificial general intelligence, doesn't it? Handling complex human domains like this.
It certainly strengthens the case, yes. This level of reasoning about emotions is a significant step.
Wow. What a deep dive indeed. We started off asking if AI could really get emotional intelligence, something we often think of as uniquely human. And what we found is, well, a surprising level of proficiency, outperforming humans on tests, generating complex new ones. It really challenges our assumptions. So the question for you, listening, is, what does this all mean? As AI keeps evolving, how will this growing cognitive empathy change things in healthcare, education, customer service? How might it change your work? And maybe more personally, does knowing AI can reason so effectively about emotions change how you view your own emotional intelligence, or how you might interact with these machines in the future? Definitely something to think about as we move deeper into this era of AI.